Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Future Space 2020. I'm Clay Morey, Chair of the Future Space Leaders Foundation, and your host for today. We're so glad you've joined us amidst these challenging times. We have an exciting program and distinguished guests lined up for you today, and I'd like to take a brief moment to reflect on why we're here. The Future Space Leaders Foundation is a STEM-focused nonprofit dedicated to advancing the next generation of American space and satellite industry professionals. We provide grants to young professionals to present papers at space conferences around the world. And throughout the years, we've raised over $300,000 to support 46 grants for undergraduate students, graduate students, and young professionals. We'll be showing videos throughout the event today of past grant winners and what this organization and all of your support means to them. For this year, it's also my pleasure to announce that the Future Space Leaders Foundation will be making grants to another nonprofit organization, the Students for Exploration and Development of Space, or SEDS. They're going to establish student chapters at historically Black colleges and universities throughout the country over the next few years. We feel it's important to support this program to increase the diversity of our grant applicants and to support their career development at the undergraduate level. In that same spirit, we've asked students from Duval High School in Lanham, Maryland, located near NASA's Goddard Space Flight Center, to contribute questions for today's sessions. Duval has an incredible aerospace engineering and aviation technology program where students design, build, and test everything from balloons to rockets, drones, and spacecraft using 3D printers and wind tunnels. It's an incredible program, and we welcome those students who are joining us today. And of course, today's event would not be possible without the tremendous support and dedication of our sponsors who are providing young people with these opportunities. I'd like to start by thanking our official media sponsor, Space Intel Report, for helping us to organize, promote, and cover today's event. And to Advanced Space, Ball Aerospace, Blue Origin, BWXT, the Commercial Space Progress Foundation, Raytheon Intelligence Space, and Virgin Galactic. We appreciate your steadfast support to developing the next generation of space and satellite industry leaders. We'll be showing video throughout today's event of who they are. Let's start with our first sponsor, Blue Origin.
Ever since I was 5 years old, that's when Neil Armstrong stepped onto the surface of the moon. I've been passionate about space, rockets, rocket engines, space travel. The problem, of course, is the space travel. It's just so expensive. And so we need to figure out how to lower the cost, and the incredible opportunity is reusability. Von Braun said after the lunar landing, "I have learned to use the word impossible with great caution."
Now I'd like to turn it over to my co-host, Sarisha Bandla. Sarisha is a past Future Space Grant Award winner and a current Future Space Leaders Foundation board member who is giving back to the community through her volunteer work. She's an aerospace engineer from Purdue University and served as Associate Director for the Commercial Spaceflight Federation before joining Virgin. Sarisha?
Thank you, Clay, and thanks for getting me out of athleisure clothes for the first time in 4 months. And thank you to everyone online joining us today for the Future Space event virtual edition. As Clay mentioned, the Future Space Leaders Foundation has given over 40 grants to young professionals in the aerospace community over the years, many of which have already become leaders in their fields, and we'd like to highlight some of them today and their experience with the fellowship. First, we have Dr. Danielle Wood. Dr. Wood is an assistant professor of media arts and sciences at MIT. Previously, Dr. Wood held positions at Mary W. Jackson NASA headquarters, Aerospace Corporation, Johns Hopkins University, Goddard Space Flight Center, and the United Nations Office of Outer Space.
Hello, my name is Danielle Wood. I was a Future Space Leader awardee in 2016. Thank you so much to the sponsors and volunteers to make this program possible. The Future Space Leader Award allowed me to attend the IAC as part of a long series of attending that conference, which has been a key part of my career. I attended every year since 2008, where I presented research on emerging space nations, showing the techniques they use to train engineers and to adopt early space policies. Later, I also had opportunities that grew out of my IAC activities to intern at NASA and the United Nations. The 2016 year was key, and I made some great friends in that cohort. Currently, I work as professor at MIT in the Media Lab. I lead a research group called Space Enabled. We pursue the mission to advance justice in Earth's complex systems using designs enabled by space. This means we're working towards sustainability on Earth and in space using tools from space-enabled designs. One of the key members of my team is one of my fellow 2016 cohort members from Future Space Leaders, Dr. Javier Stober. I want to thank all the sponsors and participants that make this possible, and thank you for joining us today.
Our first session today is on national security space. It's going to be hosted by Sarisha with Major General Pam Lincoln from U.S. Space Command. But first, a message from our sponsor, Raytheon Intelligence in Space.
Space. It has forever changed us into innovators who see the possibilities and the promise of progress. Our mission: disrupt, transform, deliver. Disrupt old limitations. Transform the meaning of innovation. And deliver new ideas faster. To harness the digital spectrum with limitless data potential. We embrace the unknown to do the impossible with capabilities that connect ground to space and back again. Turning data into outcomes.
Thank you, Clay. So today we've got Major General Pamela Lincoln in the studio with us today. General Lincoln is the mobilization assistant to the commander of the United States Space Command. In this position, she assists the commander in shaping space policy, developing plans, and conducting operations to ensure U.S. joint forces and allied partners are prepared to deter aggression, defend freedom of action, and deliver space combat power in, from, and through the space domain. General Lincoln, thanks for joining us for this socially distant interview today.
Thank you for inviting me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. So since we have a lot of students and young professionals joining us, I'd like to kick off this conversation talking about your impressive background and your impressive career. So could you talk a little bit more about, from your bachelor's in science of information technology from the University of Pittsburgh to how you ended up in your role today?
Well, thank you very much. And I've seen your bio. It's very impressive as well. So yes, I studied information science, and by the way, how fantastic is it to see how data science has evolved over the years. Having that math and computer science background, I think really helped me. I didn't start the Air Force, though, in space. I started in intercontinental ballistic missiles, and my husband and I were invited to compete to join the space career field. We both made it, and how thrilling that was. It was just absolutely thrilling, even to have the opportunity to compete. I would say that before I went into the military, I never even thought that space could be a potential opportunity for a career for me. And it wasn't for the military, I would not be where I am today and had the opportunities to work with the Global Positioning Satellite and with a weather satellite and communication satellites. It has been a phenomenal experience. And it really leads me to believe that there are probably a lot of people who don't believe that opportunities exist out there. I think to them, space is still some sort of mystical, technological career field that only the best of the best of the best can get into, and they don't realize that there's several opportunities across launch, building satellites, command and control, intelligence, and it goes on, cyber, it goes on and on.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to pull on that a little bit later, but just to set the stage, I just want to talk about what are your day-to-day duties as the mobilization assistant to the commander of the U.S. Space Command?
Well, to understand what I do day to day, first, it's important to understand what is U.S. Space Command. And it's not the Space Command that we had a couple decades ago. It is a command that provides operations in, from, and to space, specifically to deter conflict and defeat aggression. And we have 4 focus areas. The first is to deter aggression, right? We believe that every country has the right to economic prosperity that can be gained through the capabilities in space. And we have seen countries perform rather aggressively in space. So we want to deter aggression. But if that fails, our second focus area is being postured and prepared to transition quickly so we can defeat any adversary in conflict. And that provides us our third focus area, and that is providing combat capability. And when I say combat capability, I'm not talking just space. I'm talking about integrating warfighting capabilities, space capabilities throughout all the domains, air, land, space, cyber, so that we could end any conflict quickly. And then, of course, our fourth focus area is developing partnerships with our allies and other agencies of the government, and so that we could all work together and ensure that space remains a peaceful domain. What I do today as mobilization assistant is that I look over our entire reserve component. We have Army and Air National Guard. We have Air Force, Army, Navy, Marine Reserves. And these people that work in the reserve component, the vast majority of them work as a part-time capability. So they have their other life, their civilian life. And we have people that do amazing things. They are scientists. We have people that teach at MIT. We have folks that started their own tech companies. And so my role is to make sure that we're tapping into that capability in the reserve component, and that we bring those phenomenal people into the discussions when we are talking about what capabilities should we be pursuing, what technologies should we be pursuing in the future, and what could we do now to improve how we do operations.
Well, thank you. And just to pull on that a little bit more, you mentioned space is a very unique domain, and it's sometimes a mystery to people. For us, we know somewhat what the scope of that domain is, but in terms of warfighting, what does the warfighting domain look like? Warfighting look like in the space domain?
That's a fantastic question. And I think people, again, I talked about that mystical domain of space. War is war. It really doesn't matter where it occurs. War is war. So we have seen tragic commercial jetliners shot down. We have seen ships pirated at sea. We have seen aggressive cyber operations against other countries. So think of space, signals getting pirated. Lord forbid you should see a satellite be destroyed by another country. But war is war. And I hope people understand that regardless of what the domain is, aggressive actions can be taken.
And, war is war, but war also changes depending on the times and the technologies. So how has this domain changed in the last 2 to 3 years? And how have our adversaries been engaging differently because of new technologies and systems?
Well, first, it's important to understand that the domain didn't suddenly overnight become conflicted. Right? Back in 2007, the Chinese launched an anti-satellite missile. Even before that, there have been demonstrations of anti-satellite capabilities, such as lasers, right? So it's been conflicted for a while. What's different is within the last couple years, we've been allowed to talk about it. And kudos to the commander of space operations, leader of the Space Force, General Raymond, who really championed to say, we can't deter the enemy if we don't tell them what we know that they're doing openly and in public. So what's changed in the last two to 3 years is really a dialogue about, hey, we see what you're doing and we're going to call you out on it. And our allies have been doing the same thing. The Minister of Defense for France outwardly called out the Russians for one of their satellites snuggling against one of the French satellites. And they said, hey, this is outright espionage. You have to stop. So it's that open communication that has changed in the last 2 to 3 years, but even more concerning is the technology. We have seen the Chinese just advance leaps and bounds in technology and what they've been able to do in space.
And maybe I should stop saying space is a unique domain in this sense, because it seems like there are a lot of themes that do go through a lot of other branches and other services of the military. So maybe you could talk a little bit more about how U.S. Space Command integrates with the other combatant commands, and if there's any difficulties in integrating it because of the space domain or because of all that you've mentioned. It's maybe not that different in the themes.
No, excuse me. No, actually, space has been integrated in the other domains for quite some time. There's a funny story back in the first Desert War where someone had asked him, like, hey, what do you think about GPS? He's like, I don't need GPS. I have this little box right here. It tells me where I need to go. So no, space has been integrated in all the warfighting domains and in the other combatant commands. So we have planning elements integrated into our different combatant commands. And on the Space Force side, we have something called the Director of Space Forces that also integrates with their component and says, hey, these are the capabilities that we can bring to bear, and here's how to access them.
Interesting. And I'm going to take a quick tangent because I do want to ask, you said that you competed for the role, and you and your husband competed for the space roles, and you had really before not really considered a career in space. What made you decide to shift your focus to a space career and being part of the space industry? It's a little bit of a tangent, but just very curious.
No. So you probably heard this many times, but I can remember, I have a memory of my parents watching man land on the moon. It was on this black and white television that was on this cart that you could wheel from room to room. And growing up, there's always books in the library about space. And so the interest for me for space had always been there. But again, when I went to college, it just didn't seem like it was a viable career field to go into. It just really felt like, you're gonna have to be a super math student or a physicist, and I didn't see the opportunity. So going into the military, going into space, and being able to work with satellites, that was just a dream come true. And not only competing, but being accepted. My first spacecraft was GPS. I still today, sorry guys, it's still my favorite. We're not supposed to have favorites. And it's a phenomenal mission because it helps so many people worldwide. And think of the economic prosperity brought to this country because of this service that the government provides to everybody throughout the entire world. To be able to have merchant marines utilize it, and farmers and surveyors and emergency responders, right? It's just a fantastic mission. Being able to work with that satellite and then realizing that a lot of what you could do in space, sure, you need that STEM background, but then everything else can be trained. Everything else can be taught to you. You can go after innovative ideas and say, hey, I'd like to pursue this in this command and control system because I think this will improve how we maneuver our antennas. And it's not just in satellite operations. We have phenomenal opportunities in intelligence career field. We have folks that, we have a lot of people on the ground that we need to command and control the satellites. So cyber operations. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I'm always curious about that answer from everyone in our industry, because when I graduated, my class has, we knew we wanted to be in the space industry and we knew that's where we wanted to be. But more and more I run into people in our industry that just happen to be there because they didn't realize that their skill set applied, and it just really plays off of exactly what you said.
Exactly, and I think that's what we need to do a better job. we need more and more students to pursue STEM degrees, and I think they're afraid. I think maybe some of them are afraid of failure, and I think others are just afraid that it's going to be too hard. And if you have the right teacher and the right instructor, you can achieve it. And then even that, applying to these different companies, once you come into the company, you're not going to be left alone. No, they're going to train you. And you're going to learn more and more about the industry, whether it be launch, satellite operations, you name it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thank you for that answer. And speaking of our workforce, we actually have some questions from some very special guests today.
Okay.
First up is Nina Arcott, who's a current Brooke Owens Fellow and a previous Matthew Osakowitz Fellow. So let's hear her first question.
Hello, my name is Nina Arcott, and I am a 2020 Brooke Owens Fellow interning at Loft Orbital. Thank you for taking the time to answer our questions at Future Space 2020. My question for Major General Lincoln is, how does the introduction of the Space Force complement or enhance the capabilities of the Air Force?
Nina, that is a great question. And I want to emphasize that the Space Force doesn't complement just the Air Force. It actually complements all the services across the Department of Defense. What the Space Force does, it provides trained and equipped Space Force people, personnel, to be able to support all the services and all the combatant commands, so that I can send someone over to the Army or the Navy or the Marine Corps. I can send someone over to Central Command, European Command, Southern Command, you name it. And those people can explain, hey, this is a capability that you can achieve from space. So to answer your question, it really complements across the entire Department of Defense, as well as our partners in the intelligence community and even other government agencies like the State Department, Treasury, Commerce, across the entire United States government. But great question.
Thank you, Nina. Next, we have Alicia Williamson from Duval High School. Let's hear Alicia's question.
Good morning. My name is Alicia Williamson, and I'm going to be a rising senior in the Aerospace Engineering Aviation Technology program at Duval High School. My second question is for Major General Lincoln. Where do you see the Space Command as a warfighting space domain in 50 years? Thank you.
So Alicia, first of all, congratulations. That's really exciting. Congrats on your accomplishments. That's a hard question because it's really hard to see into the future, but luckily we do have visionaries. And for example, in 1957, General Bernard Schriever, one of the pioneers of the Space Force, back then had created something called Systems Command, and he said, hey, you know, someday the safety of this nation may depend upon space superiority. 50 years ago, he said that. And nothing could be true today. If I was to look into the future, I would look into the past. Before World War II, the Army had something called the Army Corps Technical School. Army Air Corps Technical School, excuse me. And it was people that attended this school as well as the instructors at the school that had to think about, how would I use air power? How would it be tested? How would I be able to implement this in time of war? If it wasn't for the work that they had done, we wouldn't have been as prepared as we were when World War II broke out and the United States entered the war. We have wonderful leaders in the Space Force, like Major General Deanna Burt, and that's her job right now, is to figure out, how do we do this? We haven't actually had a physical conflict in space, and we hope never to. We hope never to have a conflict in space. But should that happen, we think that taking that intellect and arguing with each other and trying to figure out what would be the technologies that we should pursue and how would we employ them, that is our challenge. So in 50 years, I hope and pray that we still have a peaceful domain. But there is no doubt that in the future, any conflict will rely on space superiority. Thank you for that question.
Yes, thank you, Alicia, for that question. General Lincoln, we just saw two incredible women, and they've already achieved so much. Makes me think back, what have I done in my life? But women are still, very underrepresented in our industry, as are, Black students, young professionals, Indigenous, people of color. And my opinion is that if we're only tapping into a certain demographic for our sector, we're never really going to, achieve the full potential of what our industry can do. So I was just wondering, how is the Air Force looking at diversity and inclusion, and specifically, are they doing anything to remove barriers for underrepresented demographics to pursue leadership positions in DoD and Air Force?
Great question. Actually, this is something that we have struggled with for years. I can remember working for Secretary James, and that was one of her deepest concerns was, hey, why can't we reach out more? And the truth is that all the services, not just the Air Force, not just the Space Force, we recognize that through diversity we are stronger. So breaking down barriers is really, how do we convince people that you have career, you have an opportunity, we want you to join our team. So we look at our recruiting service and what are the messages that we're sending out. We look at where we're recruiting. And by the way, I don't want to just limit it to the military. The Department of Defense employs a great number of civilians. So how do we break down those barriers as well? Across the Department of Defense, there is a zero tolerance policy for any type of bias based on race, gender, you name it. So I feel that I work in a fantastic environment, but convincing people that you can be part of this team too, just like we talked about convincing people that, hey, you have a room in space. We could use you, and we promise you that we'll train you. The same thing goes for all minorities. I want to convince everyone that you have an opportunity in the Space Force. You will be treated equally, and the sky's the limit.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I appreciate you being here because, seeing someone of, your background and the role that you're playing in our sector is definitely going to be inspiring a lot of women, and, representation matters. So, just you being here talking about your experience, we really appreciate it. And I'm sure there's a lot of students and young professionals that are looking up to you and what you're doing in the industry right now. Since we have a few more minutes, I just wanted to ask one more question. You're in the Air Force Reserve,
Yes.
An important part of our military, and just thinking forward with the establishment of the U.S. Space Force, how do you see the reserves playing a role in that?
Great question. I have to say that the reserves has always played a role and will continue to play a role. We are anticipating language in this next National Defense Authorization Act to establish some type of reserve component, whether it's still part of the Air Force or we just don't know yet. But regardless of what that language says, the reserve component, and I emphasize the reserve component because with the U.S. Space Command, it's across all the services, Guard and Reserve. They will always have a role that they continue to perform today. They will have that role going into the future.
Interesting. Well, thank you so much. I have a million other questions, but we don't have a million more minutes. So I'll turn it back to Clay, and I really appreciate your time being here, and thank you so much, General Lincoln.
Thank you again for inviting me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, General Lincoln, and thank you, Sarisha, for that insightful conversation. Now, here's a few words from another one of our supporting organizations, Virgin Galactic.
That's one small step.
55 seconds. 58 seconds. Motor shutdown. 364,000 feet.
Amazing view. View is incredible.
Welcome to space, man.
Beautiful black sky. Welcome to the club, astronaut. I like this club.
Next, we would like to spotlight Future Space Grant awardee Caroline Zhuang. I first met Caroline when she was a Brooke Owens Fellow interning at Bryce Space and Technology, and I knew pretty much instantly that she was a rock star. She's now part of the executive team at the Brooke Owens Fellowship Program, and she's currently a PhD student in Earth and Environmental Sciences at Columbia University and formerly the project coordinator for the NASA Citizen Science Project Landslide Reporter at Goddard. At NASA, Caroline launched the project and handled all aspects from outreach to data analysis with the help of the Goddard team.
Hi there, my name is Caroline Chuang. As a past Future Space Leader Fellow, I had an incredible experience. I got the chance to go to Washington, D.C. for the International Astronautical Congress, where I was coached on public speaking and then got to present in one of their plenaries in front of my largest audience ever. I also opened up my network to the Future Space Leaders Fellows, both present and past, and became part of their growing family, and I really hope to keep in contact with everybody. Finally, the Future Space Leaders grant allowed me to go to the American Geophysical Union's fall meeting in San Francisco, where I then got to network and learn more about my own discipline as a PhD student in climate and wildfires. And on the slide, I actually got to meet my biggest role model, Dr. Mae Jemison, a former NASA astronaut. To all the young professionals and graduate students out there, I really encourage you to apply. This was a really meaningful experience to me, and I'm sure it would be for you too. And to everyone out there who wants to make more experiences like this, like mine, happen, I encourage you to donate to the Future Space Leaders Foundation. Thank you.
Now we'll turn to our second panel session for today. We're honored to have NASA Administrator Jim Bridenstine join us for a conversation with Carissa Christensen, who is Chief Executive Officer and founder of Bryce Space and Technology. She's been a thought leader and analyst for more than 2 decades in our industry, and she's one of the great analytical minds on space policy topics. She's not only one of our founding board members, but also chairs our advisory board. Before this session starts, here's a short message from Ball Aerospace.
We are our employees, our communities, and our customer missions. We are a mission partner.
Acting with curiosity, passion, and humility.
We go beyond to solve the world's hardest problems.
So you can go protect today, go shape tomorrow, and explore the unknown.
When we face challenges together, we go toward greatness together to help protect lives
and enable a more sustainable future.
Together, we are stronger.
Together, we go beyond.
Thank you, Clay. And once again, thanks to our sponsors, both this year and throughout our history. I am honored to introduce NASA's administrator, James F. Bridenstine. The administrator spoke at his first Future Space Leaders event shortly after arriving in Washington as a member of Congress for the 1st District in Tulsa. And he supported our activities since, for which we're very grateful.
I didn't know he was from Tulsa.
The administrator has both space and STEM and national service in his DNA. He is a naval aviator and a combat veteran. He served as the executive director of the Tulsa Air and Space Museum and Planetarium before he entered Congress. And now he is leading NASA. Administrator, welcome. It's a pleasure to have you here. And I'd like to start by asking you, as you lead NASA in this time of increased space activity in the commercial sector, increased national security activity, and of course, increased civil government activity in expanding our presence in LEO, returning to the moon, continuing to explore the solar system. What are your priorities? What's at the top of your agenda? Take these ambitious missions.
Well, thank you, Carissa, and it's great to be with you and with all the young folks today that are pursuing space careers. I would say, our first thing is we're rapidly moving to commercialize low Earth orbit. And of course, a lot of people saw the launch that we had just the other day, where we launched a Falcon 9 rocket with a Crew Dragon with Bob Behnken and Doug Hurley, and they flew to the International Space Station. So that's commercial crew. That's a program that NASA initiated years ago, and it finally came to fruition, and now we're looking forward to getting into regular cadence. But it's a part of the total commercial architecture of the future of space in low Earth orbit specifically. And the reason we want to commercialize low Earth orbit is because NASA has a goal of being a customer, one customer of many customers in a robust commercial marketplace in low Earth orbit. But we also want to have numerous providers that are competing against each other on cost and innovation. And if we can achieve that, not just for launch, but also for resupply of the International Space Station and space stations themselves, so commercial space stations, what that means is NASA will be there as a customer and we will always be in low Earth orbit. There's lots of research to do, but then we can use the resources that we receive from the taxpayer to do other things for which there is not yet a commercial marketplace, namely go to the moon and onto Mars. And so it's really hard to separate what those priorities are because they all intertwine. But the bottom line is we need to commercialize low Earth orbit. We need to get the resources necessary to create a permanent presence on the moon. And all of that is in the president's first space policy directive. He says we're going to go to the moon. We're going to go sustainably. We're going to go with commercial partners and international partners. We're going to stay. And then we're also going to learn how to live and work on another world so that we can eventually get to Mars. That's the objective. So those are the big goals that we're working on each and every day. And yeah, they're all intertwined. They all work together.
So we have some extremely thoughtful student questions that speak to this very topic of how are those goals going to be achieved. And if we could run the first question, a question from students at Duval High School, which of course is close to Goddard Space Flight Center and works in partnership with Goddard for its aerospace program. Let's start with the first question from Duval, if we could.
Hi, my name is Jeremy Kigundu. I'm a class of 2020 graduate of the aerospace program at Duval High School.
Hello, my name is JC Kigundu. I'm a rising sophomore transferring into the Duval 2023 aerospace program.
Our first question is for Administrator Bridenstine. We've recently witnessed the engineering marvels that is the Falcon 9 rocket boosters from SpaceX and their ability to be recovered after their launch. What direction do you see NASA going in terms of reusing machinery? Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, it's a great question. And the answer is we need to reuse everything. We need to drive down costs and increase access. And the way we talk about it is, think about simple air travel. Imagine getting into a 737 and flying from, maybe New York City to Los Angeles. And when you get there, you throw away the airplane. It would just be so expensive and so cost prohibitive that nobody could fly. And yet that's how we've been doing space travel for all of these years, throwing away the rockets, throwing away the capsules, throwing away the command modules. And so what we're doing now is we're building architectures where as much as possible, everything that we can reuse, we want to reuse. So to that end, right now we're in the process of building what we call Gateway, which is a small space station that will be in orbit around the moon. Think of it as a reusable command module. When we go back to the Apollo program, we remember that we had astronauts on the surface of the moon, but we had a command module that was orbiting the moon, communicating with the astronauts, providing communication relay, those kind of things. We want to, and all of that got thrown away. The landing system got thrown away, the ascent module got thrown away, the command module got thrown away, everything got thrown away. And so it ends up being very costly. And the problem with Apollo, as much as we all love the Apollo program, The problem with it is that it ended. We want to create a sustainable program so that when your children and your grandchildren and your great grandchildren, when they're doing their work, they're advancing the work that you yourself helped to create. That's the goal. So we have to have a sustainable program, which means we have to drive down costs, we have to increase access. So we're building the Gateway, which will be in orbit around the moon. The Gateway is that reusable command module that will be in orbit around the moon for 15 years. We're building reusable landing systems that can go back and forth to the surface of the moon from the Gateway. And of course, we need as much as possible to be creating reusable launch vehicles. And of course, SpaceX has proven, and Blue Origin has proven, that we can, in fact, not just launch vehicles, but we can bring them back, we can land them, and we can reuse them. And those are all important things for the future of space because we need it to be sustainable.
So you speak about a sustainable presence on the moon, an ongoing presence on the moon. As we envision that future and as we envision increased space activity generally, the rules of the road, the rules of behavior in space become more and more important so that various actors are all committed to behaving in such a way that space is accessible and usable for all. Can you talk a little bit about the Artemis Accords and why that's important and how they fit into that vision?
Absolutely. So, NASA is an amazing tool of diplomacy. We've got 15 nations on the International Space Station that operate it. We've had astronauts from 19 different countries. We've had experiments from 103 different countries on the International Space Station. And now that we have created the Artemis program, which is our return to the moon, not just with the next man, but with the first woman, under the Artemis program, all of the nations that are on the International Space Station with us, they all want to go to the moon with us as well. And now there's a whole lot more countries all around the world that have space agencies and they want human spaceflight programs and they're investing money. They're not just saying, hey, we want to be with you. They're saying, we want to be with you and we're willing to put our money where our mouth is. And so that's a great development. But what we have to make sure we do is we use this as a forcing function to create rules of behavior that enable all of us to enjoy and utilize space, not just for this generation, but the next generation and the generation after that. So when we think about this as a forcing function, look, if you want to be with us on the Artemis program, we want you to be with us. But there are certain basic things that we all have to agree to, like the registration convention. You cannot be launching things into space that are unregistered, which is, a violation of international law. You cannot do that because it creates a dangerous environment. And we need a convention. We need a convention that says very clearly how you're going to not create debris. And how do you come to the end of life of your satellites? How do you deorbit them? If you're in geostationary orbit, how do you super sync them? So the Artemis Accords it establishes some very basic norms of behavior for civil space so that all of us can continue to explore and develop space more than ever before, but it also is intended to preserve space for generations to come. The other big challenge, Carissa, that we see in the future is when countries and companies end up on the surface of the moon, they might be competing for these scarce resources, namely the water ice, hundreds of millions of tons of water ice on the south pole of the moon specifically. And so how do we embedded in the Outer Space Treaty of 1967 is this convention called due regard. As a Navy pilot, when I was flying over international waters, if ever I got challenged, I would say I'm a sovereign U.S. naval aircraft operating due regard over international waters. What that means is I'll stay out of your way, you stay out of my way. We won't interfere with each other because we are in fact over international waters. Nobody owns the ocean, but we can all feel free to operate there. And that's the same, I think, pattern that we need to develop on the surface of the moon. The Outer Space Treaty says that you cannot appropriate the moon for national sovereignty, but at the same time, we all need to feel free to operate there without interference. And so that's another part of the Artemis Accords. And we need to really establish, I think, these basic principles of operations as space continues to become more of a destination for more people and hardware and robots and rovers and all of the activities that we envision on the surface of the moon and just in space in general.
That vision of the future, I think, is an excellent jumping off point for our next student question. Can we play the second question from Duval High School?
Good morning. My name is Alicia Williamson, and I'm going to be a rising senior in the Aerospace Engineering Aviation Technology program at Duval High School. My first question is for Honorable Bridenstine. How will future generations help the Artemis program successfully achieve its goals? Thank you.
Oh, future generations. Oh, that's important. So, what's that?
These students and the students that follow them.
Absolutely. So the number one thing is we need your enthusiasm. We need an army of people out there who want to claim what we call the Artemis generation. This is our time. Look, I am the first NASA administrator in history who wasn't alive when we had people living and working on the moon. I was born in 1975. The last time we had somebody on the moon was 1972. We have to make sure that your generation doesn't miss out on what my generation missed out on. So we need to go back to the moon, we need to go sustainably, and we need to go onto Mars. But for your generation, what I would encourage you to do is get active. Get involved in an organization like this organization, Future Space Leaders. Get involved in students for the exploration and development of space. Be an enthusiast, be an advocate. These are the things that ultimately result in outcomes that we're gonna need. And of course, you know, we hear lots of talk about going into the STEM fields, science, technology, engineering, and math. I would also tell you, as somebody who's a recovering politician, I served in Congress for a number of years. I will tell you, we have to have the politics right. The challenge that we have had as an agency has really been not a challenge of technological capability, because we're amazing at that. It's the challenge of political consistency, constancy of purpose. And so we have to get the politics right so we can get all the other STEM activities to do what they need to do to achieve the outcomes. So if we have a new generation that rises up and says, hey, we love the Apollo generation, but Apollo was the 1960s and 1970s. And in the Apollo generation, all of our astronauts came from fighter pilot backgrounds and test pilot backgrounds, and there were no opportunities for women in those days, and very limited opportunities for other minorities. And now we're in a position where we have this very diverse, highly qualified astronaut corps. We're going forward to the moon. I don't say back to the moon, because this time when we go, we're gonna stay. We're going forward to the moon, and we're doing it under the name of Apollo's twin sister. And she, in Greek mythology, was the goddess of the moon. So we need a new generation to rise up and say, hey, look, we are the Artemis generation. We love the Apollo generation, but we are the Artemis generation. And we wanna make sure that our generation doesn't miss out on, you know, having people living and working on the moon and even going to Mars. That's the generation that we need your generation to become.
In the previous panel, I thought one of the very interesting points was the idea that space professionals are not simply aerospace engineers, although aerospace engineers are critical and necessary, that a very diverse range of skills from you know, AI and robotics to data analytics to accounting and finance to communications to manage NASA's wonderful Twitter account, which is, I think, in the top 100 Twitter accounts globally, which is just amazing. It's football stars and actors and NASA.
All right.
So can you talk a little bit about the diversity of the NASA workforce and the potential career fields that students might think about?
Absolutely. So again, I talked about the what we need as far as we need political support. One of the things that I've done from day one is build bipartisan consensus for what we're trying to achieve. We have to make sure that NASA as an agency maintains bipartisan support, and in fact, I like to say even apolitical support. So look, we're trying to do science and discovery and exploration, and Republicans love that and Democrats love that, and because of that, we're having success right now. And we need to make sure that it stays in that bipartisan, apolitical kind of realm. But I would also say that a lot of when we think about what the future of space looks like, and as crowded as it's becoming, congested and contested, and even in some cases hostile, we need to have lawyers that can understand and deal with the liability convention, for example, of the Outer Space Treaty, and make sure that we are challenging bad actors when they rise up and do something that is damaging to space for everybody. And I'm not just talking about intentional bad actions. I'm talking about negligence, for example, and how do you hold people accountable and create costs for doing damage to space. So I think the legal regime is going to be critically important in the future. Communications, I think, is very important. I'll tell you, we've got amazing scientists and engineers at NASA. But if we didn't have a robust communication operation, how do we take the numbers that the scientists and engineers are dealing with and communicate it to the public that don't speak the same language necessarily? Because ultimately the public is going to get us the political support. So communications, legislative affairs, the political process, the legal regime. And of course, we as an agency, we need accountants. And when we think about the future of space with commercialization, we're going to need, in fact, we have economists. There is really, when we think about space, you're thinking about really a marketplace. And so anything that you would see in a business or a marketplace, all of those functions exist at NASA, and they also exist in all of these private space companies. So you don't have to necessarily go into the STEM fields. Certainly, we love people to go into the STEM fields. But look, if you're interested in journalism, we need people that can share the stories. Who can tell our stories? Like who's going to be the next? I don't know. The next broadcaster who's going to talk about the first woman walking on the surface of the moon. These are the things that I think your generation should certainly be thinking about.
That community of space that consists of countries, that consists of industry, that consists of startups and major companies. I think our next and our final student question wants to explore that a little bit more. So can we run our final question? This from a Brooke Owens Fellow.
Hello, my name is Nina Arcott, and I am a 2020 Brooke Owens Fellow interning at Loft Orbital. Thank you for taking the time to answer our questions at Future Space 2020. My question for Administrator Bridenstine is, how do you see the role of commercial and international partnerships with NASA changing or improving future projects, and what are the most significant challenges in establishing and maintaining those partnerships?
Yeah, that is, and it's so important because there are countries around the world, for example, that don't have the robust commercial capabilities that we have in the United States. And so when I have our international dialogues, they say, well, we think it's great that you're promoting commercial, but we don't have the ability to do that because we don't have the commercial industry that you have in the United States. So trying to bring in the international partners and the commercial partners is not always an easy task. But the way I see it is, that's where NASA and the United States of America, we can step up and we can lead. So what we say is, what are the big objectives that we're trying to achieve? And when we try to achieve that, going sustainably to the moon, landing on Mars. And then we say, what are the architectures that we need to achieve those outcomes? And what is it that the United States of America uniquely has the capability of doing? And what is it that these other countries uniquely have the capability of doing? And then finding out which each country can provide to that overall capability. And then those countries themselves can figure out within their own countries what is the mix of government and commercial capability to achieve those outcomes. So it's really trying to figure out the architecture, figure out what country does what, and then within those countries, what is the commercial industry, what can they provide for those activities. But I'll tell you, we have more countries right now stepping up, wanting to be part of the Artemis program than I ever could have imagined. And a country like Australia, they stood up last year for the first time ever, a brand new space agency. And not only they stand it up, within a year, they had $150 million committed, and they put it all towards the Artemis program because they want to be with the United States of America on the surface of the moon. So that's a very positive development. And here's what they're really, really good at doing. They're good at extracting resources from the Earth in very hostile environments, like the center part of Australia, for example. And they're good at extracting resources remotely. That's tremendously valuable when you go to the moon. We're going to be using the water ice on the moon to create life support capabilities, water to drink and air to breathe. Water is H2O, that's oxygen, so it's air to breathe. And liquid oxygen is an oxidizer for fuel, and hydrogen is fuel. So H2O is in fact rocket fuel, and it's available in hundreds of millions of tons on the moon. Well, it just so happens that this country that just started a brand new space agency is stepping up to the plate and saying, we want to be with you, and we have these abilities, these unique abilities to do robotic extraction of resources that would mirror not maybe mirror, but close to what we might need on the surface of the moon. So how do we bring those together, and how do we benefit, and how do they benefit? These are the kind of challenges. And of course, it's going to be their industry in Australia that's supporting that effort. So bringing international and commercial together is critically important. But your question is so important because NASA is a very important tool of diplomacy. Going back to the previous question, that's why I think it's so important when we look at all these career fields. When you think about, foreign service or being a career diplomat, those are also very important roles that when we think about the future of space exploration, we're going to need, those kinds of careers as well.
Administrator, we just have a few moments left, and I want to use those moments to ask you, this is an amazing job that you have. What's surprised you about it? And what are you most excited about going forward?
So I'll tell you, I don't know that it was surprising. I'll tell you what was surprising. Number one, that everybody loves NASA. I mean, like I said, I came from the political world, but what I have found is that this is one of those jobs where you lead an agency that everybody loves, everybody wants to support, everybody wants to see us doing amazing things in space. And so that's very positive. I'll tell you that was pleasantly surprising. And I'll tell you what else was a surprise. When we have international meetings with the heads of space agencies from all over the world, it's amazing how people come together. So it doesn't just bring Republicans and Democrats together. It brings people together across very broad geopolitical kind of backgrounds. And when we think about the International Space Station, for example, this year in November, we will be celebrating 20 years of American astronauts living and working side by side in space with Russian cosmonauts. Now, here on Earth, the relationship has pretty much broken down in so many different ways. And I don't think I'm, raising any eyebrows when I say that. But when it comes to space exploration, the terrestrial disputes that we have kind of fall away, and we're able to continue to collaborate in space. So it's geopolitical, it's across party lines, so all that is very positive. I'll tell you one area where it does get a little challenging sometimes is that while it's not partisan, it's parochial. Every member of Congress wants the next big thing in their district, whether it's, you know, a new contract for how we're going to get to the moon, or you know, a university that is going to do some research for us. And so it's not partisan, it is parochial. So you know, the understanding of the political process and how do you build consensus, it's a big challenge. And I'll tell you, that was again, I wouldn't say it was surprising that that's the case. What is surprising is sometimes how difficult that can be.
So it's like maybe the flip side of everybody loves NASA is everybody wants a part of it.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
Well, what a pleasure it's been to have this conversation with you. And thank you again for your participation in future space events over the years. That's inspiring for the students and young professionals that that attend these conferences, and always fascinating for us. We look forward to our next opportunity to speak with you, and thank you so much.
Always. Thank you so much, Carissa. We'll do it again.
Thanks.
What a great conversation. Thank you, Administrator. Thank you, Carissa. Jim Bridenstine's been a huge supporter of this organization from his time in Congress, and now as Administrator, we appreciate his support and participation. And now I think this was his third time appearing at a Future Space event. Now we're going to go for a quick word from our sponsor, Advanced Space.
Three, two, one.
Our next Future Space Grant awardee spotlight is fellow Boilermaker Deepak Utyam. So I'm sorry, I'm going to say it, Boiler Up. Deepak co-founded and is running a tech startup, Tri-D Dynamics, which focuses on advancing metallic additive manufacturing. He has worked at SpaceX, Moon Express, Purdue Zucrow Laboratory, and multiple NASA centers starting from the age of 17. And he's led multiple successful NASA-funded projects, including the production and testing of the first and second fully 3D printed liquid rocket engine from a university.
Hi, my name is Deepak. I'm a Future Space Leader class of 2017. I've met a tremendous amount of people during my time in the program. Rob Meyerson, former President of Blue Origin, Jim Bridenstine, Charlie Bolden, Peter Beck from Rocket Lab, met executives from DLR, ESA. I am an entrepreneur, venture-backed, and my time as a Future Space Leader has tremendously excelled my career and allowed me to network with the right people that I needed to be able to make the business deals that are necessary for me to get to the next step and be able to fundraise the amount of capital that I need for my company. But I just want to say, if you have an opportunity to apply to the Future Space Leaders Program, do it and don't hesitate. This is the best fellowship I've been part of my entire career, and I highly recommend it. Good luck.
The Future Space Leaders Foundation works with a lot of other space nonprofit organizations, including the Matthew Isakowitz Fellowship, which is a mentor and internship program, the Students for Exploration and Development of Space, the Space Generation Advisory Council, the National Space Club, Space Foundation, and others. We're really proud to really bring our grant award winners and to use those other organizations to bring a crew of folks that will be applying for our grant award winners. And one of those organizations is near and dear to my heart, the Brooke Owens Fellowship. We're pleased to welcome our friends from the Brookies today and the Brookie alumni who are joining online. Since 2017, the Brooke Owens Fellowship has recognized over 150 high-achieving women and gender minority college students and provided them with competitive aerospace internships and executive mentoring to launch them to the careers of their dreams. We're also proud that one of the Brookie alumni is currently a Future Space Leader Fellow. In this next video, you're going to get inspired by the program. And please note, applications will be open later this summer for the next class of Brookies. Now we're on to the third and final panel discussion for today, which will be moderated by Eric Stallmer, president of the Commercial Spaceflight Federation. Eric's been working in the space industry for more than 2 decades. He's an amazing force on Capitol Hill, representing the commercial space industry, and he's a leader in pushing positive change for new space companies. He's one of my oldest friends in Washington, D.C., and we hail from the same hometown in upstate New York, Niskayuna. It's my pleasure to turn it over to Eric for this exciting panel. But first, a quick message from BWXT.
Space exploration is important because it allows the human species to continue to grow and expand and explore the world and the universe around us. It's also an opportunity to bring us together for a common goal, and space is one of those opportunities.
That's one thing I really like about the U.S. space program. It's really bringing people together. It's bringing companies together, the industry and the government together to really push the bounds of what we can do as a nation.
As we move to a species that goes to bodies such as the Moon and Mars and stay there in observation and for scientific purposes, we need the energy to stay there. We need to power the lights, we need to create the oxygen, we need to process the water. And to do that, you can't bring natural gas, you can't bring gasoline. Nuclear power is great for that.
When we plant that American flag on Mars, it is very likely that that mission is going to go through Lynchburg, Virginia, because of BWXT. Now, when we talk about what it takes to get to Mars, we're talking about the idea that we need nuclear propulsion.
These projects help provide a capability to the United States and to the country that we currently don't have. They're an enabling technology. It's a difficult problem that we are aiming to solve to provide that capability.
The Apollo program in the 60s captured the imagination of the nation. It gave us a common goal to strive for. Now, with Artemis and going to Mars, we have the opportunity again. It's not going to be easy, but it's going to inspire the next generation of Americans.
Well, Clay, thank you so much for the very kind introduction you just gave. And more importantly, thank you so much for your leadership and vision in creating the Future Space Leaders Foundation and getting so many of us in the industry involved in it. It's a great organization, and despite the challenges that we had, that we're all facing this year with the COVID-19, I'm so glad that you were able and with the team to be able to pull this together, albeit virtually. I know we'd all like to be together in person, but this is certainly the next best thing. I am actually thrilled today to be able to moderate this, the third panel, but I'm biased. I think it's going to be the best panel because I have 2 really good friends that are going to be joining us today. The first member of Congress that's going to be joining us is Congresswoman Xochitl Torres Small, who really has some really unique background, but some interesting facts and statistics that I found was amazing. One, she represents the largest district in the country, the largest not at large district. This district is so big; it's virtually the entire state of New Mexico. So you can see the range of the diversity issues that the congresswoman handles, like rural broadband and healthcare, across the country, across the state, to economic development, border security, the full gamut, as well as, and this is something I'm very biased on, being in Las Cruces, her hometown where she grew up, went to school, returned back to the community as soon as she finished school, and began her public service, and has not stopped since she graduated school. In that district is home to Spaceport America, which is one of our crown jewels of American commercial spaceports, and a lot of activity going on there. So the Congresswoman has hit the ground running as soon as she got to Washington, really tackling a lot of these unique issues, like I said, on helping rural communities in southern New Mexico and with the healthcare, and working on national security issues, and working on job growth, and has just done a fantastic job. It's just a real rising star in the party and in Congress. So I'm thrilled to have you with us today, Congresswoman, and the floor is yours. I just wanted you to give a little introduction to the audience. We have over, I think, 700 people watching, from the full range of students to postgraduates to old guys like me that love space. So the floor is yours, and then we'll open up to a little Q&A.
Eric, thank you so much. It's always such a pleasure to join you, and your enthusiasm for space is contagious. It is inspiring, and I'm always grateful to get to find ways to work with you and the people that you inspire in this great journey to space. So I just appreciate the chance to join all of you. Thank you for inviting me to join you today as we continue to work together to support the future of our space industry and ensure that our nation continues to lead the way in space, in research, technology, and in exploration. I'm so grateful to get to join so many of you virtually. It's you don't get quite the same butterflies via Zoom, but knowing that there are 700 people out there committed to this shared cause is really exciting. And I'm so grateful that we found a way to unite together today in spite of the challenges that we're facing. I'm really pleased to get to join my colleague, Representative Waltz. We just spent 14 hours together through working on the NDAA, which I'll talk a little bit more about soon. The NDAA has vital implications for America's leadership in space and is crucial for our future. So as we've learned from July 20th, 1969 to today, we can only reach space through collaboration. And I'm grateful to work with you to create opportunities for those venturing into the industry, as well as for those looking to gain skills and further their professional development. As some of you may know, I have the privilege of representing New Mexico's 2nd Congressional District, and I'm proud that my home in southern New Mexico plays such an important role in supporting our nation's space ambitions. It was really a joy to get to hear the last part of Administrator Bridenstine's comments about how space is not partisan, but it has become parochial, because as you know, I'm very proud of my district and the role that we play. But I prefer to see it as an opportunity for collaboration, that we all have unique opportunities to be involved and unique assets to help bring to the table as we take on this journey together. So southern New Mexico is home to both White Sands Missile Range and Holloman Air Force Base, which are both deeply tied to the space industry. And the work done there by our scientists and engineers make America's future space exploration possible. Virgin Galactic and Spaceport America have also made home bases in southern New Mexico, as Eric was mentioning. As the first purpose-built commercial spaceport in the world, they are at the forefront of the commercial space industry, and they give our district new and exciting opportunities to continue to explore our universe. Federally licensed, privately owned spaceports play an increasingly important role in DoD orbital and suborbital mission launch capacity. These facilities also have some significant investments in infrastructure and are available right now to meet the needs of the military and to improve our country's national security resiliency. By utilizing these facilities, we can diversify our launch operations and capabilities in a quick and efficient manner so that new projects, as we've recently seen, as well as hypervelocity development can happen. I've appreciated the opportunity to work with many of you and am continuing to advocate for our growing space industry in Congress. And one of those crucial ways that Congress can contribute to our space exploration is to have the federal funding and resources we need to progress. So one of those ways we've ensured that is, as I mentioned last week, the House Armed Services Committee voted to pass the National Defense Authorization Act. And I fought for over 20 provisions in this year's defense bill that will support the unique missions at Holloman Air Force Base at White Sands Missile Range, and also include support for our thriving and growing space industry. So the legislation is going to head to the House floor for consideration now, and I want to share just a few quick wins that I helped secure. I introduced an amendment to support continued research, development, and testing of U.S. Space Force's rocket systems and launch program, which will help deliver a number of technology demonstrations and inform future space system development. I also fought to secure $10 million for rocket technology and to implement rapid, affordable testing to demonstrate hypersonic weapons capability at White Sands Missile Range. In Magdalena, which is also in the district I serve, we secured $5 million in funding for the Magdalena Ridge Observatory Interferometer, which New Mexico Institute of Mining and Technology and New Mexico State University use for their science and engineering programs, creating future space explorers which are much needed in this industry. Additionally, I highlighted the need to repair Holloman Air Force Base's high-speed test track infrastructure and secured a comprehensive study on the adequacy of the infrastructure to lay the groundwork for much-needed repairs to continue to do testing for things such as hypersonic missiles. And finally, we are not going to make progress on the important work ahead of us if we don't invest in education in our future space explorers, and that means STEM education. Senator Heinrich and I fought to secure report language in this year's NDAA to support initiatives like the CREW program at NMSU, which would provide students with an internship while also helping them obtain security clearances that they need to enter into the workforce immediately after they graduate. This is one of the key challenges that I've heard from the Department of Defense in terms of continuing to lead the way when it comes to our final frontier. These are just some of the ways I am at work to support our country's growing space industry, and I look forward to the continued work ahead. So with that, I just want to thank you all and have one final nod to the work that our private space exploration is doing in communities as well as trying to reach space. During COVID-19 and the public health pandemic, I know Southern New Mexico is deeply grateful for the work that Virgin Galactic did. Its efforts to donate medical supplies, including masks, suits, and gloves, and pulse oximeters, several hundred N95 masks when they were at their shortest supply, getting them to crucially necessary frontline workers, and also respirators in hospitals. So as New Mexico and our country continues that work of collaboration to reach space, as we rebuild our economy, we have to support programs that encourage innovation and progress in space exploration and technology. So thank you all so much for the opportunity to join you today and discuss some of the recent progress we've made. I'm grateful to partner with all of you.
Thank you so much, Congresswoman. And that was just a really great overview of the work you're doing in Congress, and especially the activity on a lot of the committees. That was one of the questions I was going to have with all the national security, space interests, and organizations in your district. You know, how is that affecting the Armed Services, the HASC markup, and the NDAA? And you did a great overview on that. With Spaceport America in your district, that was a long road for New Mexico, and it was somewhat of a leap of faith for them to fund that, develop and fund and build that. And it took a little bit of time, but now things are really taking off, pardon the pun. But what is that going to mean to the local economy and the workforce and to the STEM education? How do you see that developing?
Eric, I really appreciate you recognizing the leap of faith that it has taken for communities to invest in our space future and invest in the public-private partnerships that we are continuing to create, because it takes a lot of investment and it takes a whole community to decide to invest money into projects like Spaceport America, recognizing that they are making those investments for their children and for their future and their future communities, for their grandchildren. So now that we are starting to see those investments bear fruit, it's deeply exciting as we continue to invest in STEM education so that we can grow engineers and scientists right here at home in New Mexico, who will then have great jobs here to be able to work for Virgin Galactic at the spaceport, to be on the cutting edge of not just nationally but globally our space exploration. And that's why we're going to have to continue to invest in STEM education so that we can continue to support this kind of work.
I know you've got a plane to catch back to Washington, so I don't want to take too much more of your time, but I have one more question before we get to Congressman Waltz. But you're part of this rising, the inspirational kind of, your story's inspirational. You're part of this rising generation in Congress, in the new Congress. Could you describe quickly the path that kind of got you there, and if you have any advice for audience members on who would like to follow in your footsteps of their own careers?
Well, I think that our nation's commitment to space exploration really provides some keys for people like me who are still trying to figure out how we can best contribute to the dream of our nation, to being able to build and grow and continue to explore. So sometimes it doesn't seem like it's a straight line. For me, I thought I was going to go into international development and went to school in Southern Africa and studied in DC, only to return home when I was reminded of just how important my home was. And because of that, the opportunity to invest in the place where you're from, it allowed me to actually do both, finding that the love for kind of public policy could also help grow our economy here in southern New Mexico. And one of the things that's so exciting is even though I didn't end up becoming a scientist or an engineer, my ability to participate in the policy making when it comes to science and when it comes to space exploration really shows how everyone has a role in this vital industry when it comes to space. And so in terms of how people are investing in their future and building their future, for me, it's about finding what you love, finding not only what you love doing, but how you like to serve. Because I think, at least for me, I've found my greatest fulfillment in collaborating to solve problems for the home that I love. And I think if you can find what inspires you, and I think for many of you, it is exploring this next frontier, and find the way that you can best contribute to that, that path might not always be straight, but it'll lead you to where you want to go.
Well, I think that is great advice, and it has served you well, and it certainly has served your constituents well. I can't thank you enough for coming on today. This was great. I only wish, we could have done this in person, but in time as we move forward. But thank you so much, Congressman. Really, really appreciate your remarks and you taking the time with us today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Eric.
All right. So for our next, this is a great segue for me, especially as the Congresswoman left off with her kind of really inspiring story about service to country and service to community. It leads in really great for our next speaker, Congressman Mike Waltz. Mike Waltz represents Florida's 6th district, just north of the Space Center, the Kennedy Space Center, in portions of Flagler and Volusia counties, and a little bit of Lake and St. Johns counties. Mike was born in Florida, went off to college, Virginia Military Institute, where he started a incredibly distinguished military career that still continues to this day. It was my privilege and honor to be able to serve with Mike in the Army. And when I met him, I realized that this is one of the brightest leaders that the Army has. And it's pretty prophetic on my part, I must add, to see that. in Mike, and his leadership transcends not just to the Army, to the halls of Congress, but really to his community. And it's his community that he really believes in and has given back to. I'm really thrilled to have Mike join us today, or Congressman Waltz, I should say, Colonel Waltz, any number of titles that I give him, but friend is my favorite title to address him as. But Mike has seen just a lot of excitement go on in his first term in Congress, and like Doris Small, is really a part of this inspirational generation of leaders, new leaders in Congress. So with that, Mike, I want to turn the floor over to you for some remarks. I mean, maybe we can have take a little Q&A afterwards.
Yeah, hey, thanks, Eric. I know you guys have heard from Administrator Bridenstine and from Doris Small and from a number of folks. So I'll just keep my upfront remarks brief, and I think it's probably better to spend most of the time in a Q&A. As you said, I sit in kind of a unique spot. There's only, I think, 2 or 3 of us out of the 435 that sit on both the Armed Services Committee and the Space Committee. And so we see both sides of this. We see the NASA, NOAA, civilian side. Let's go to the moon, go to the Mars. What do we do about the space station? How do we do all of that? But then I also see the national security side of that. I don't know, Eric, has anybody really spent some time talking about China and what they're doing in space and really the threats that we face?
General Lincoln touched on it a little bit earlier.
Okay.
Coming from a Space Force perspective and Space Command perspective. But I think you have been a real champion on that issue. So if you could dwell on that a little bit.
So you know, seeing both sides of that equation, right, and how it comes together, and then oftentimes, you know, you have to love government. You know, how oftentimes it doesn't come together. And then how those pieces then come together with the private sector, which was really, I think, epitomized by the SpaceX launch that we were able to attend with the president and the vice president, not once but twice, down in Cape Canaveral just a month ago, and how all of those pieces come together. You know, I just have to tell you that launch was awesome. I mean, that was really one of the most incredible moments of my time. I have to tell you also, as someone who really pushed the president hard to attend, you know, my heart was already in my throat, but I think it was like triply so that all of that went well and that it went on time, and just what a great moment for the country. And what was really cool was to see all the news services just going wall to wall on it. It kind of took me back to the space shuttle launches that I watched as a kid, and even back to the Apollo days. To have the 50th anniversary last year and so much attention on that is really incredible and inspiring for the country, particularly with everything else that's going on. I'll tell you, Eric, and for everybody watching, I'm sitting on a really cool invitation you all should be jealous of, that I'm to have pizza with Doug and Bob when they come back. With the astronauts when they come back, we're going to have a pizza dinner with them and Minister Bridenstine and General Raymond, the commander of the Space Force, which is, you should be jealous because it's going to be really cool. Let's all pray, though. The launch was, as we all know, half the equation. Re-entry is the other half of the equation. So let's really pray for a safe re-entry. You look, on the national security side, the difference between the 1960s and now is our entire economy, the global economy, our way of life is dependent on what's up in space. Agriculture, banking, finance, global logistics, of course, telecommunication. The average person touching space 20 to 30 times a day doesn't even know it. Is all dependent on that architecture that's up there, and certainly our military precision, guidance, command and control, the ability to project our forces around the world, all dependent on space. Every war game that we have now, the first shots are not fired by the Navy or not fired by land forces. It's fired up in space because of those dependencies. So what does that mean? That means the bad guys, our adversaries, know that as well, we have to have the ability to defend what's up there. And frankly, when it was built decades ago and over the last few decades, it wasn't built with necessarily being able to defend it in mind. And then kind of like, frankly, what we have, the theory at least with nuclear weapons, is deterrence, to have the other side to know that we can take your stuff down too if you mess with ours. That kind of understanding and capability needs to be there as well. And this is everything, the Chinese in particular have developed missiles they can launch that can take our satellites down, laser weapons, cyber jamming, all kinds of things that we have to be able to defend against, but then also to kind of keep the peace, they need to know that we can do that as well. The other thing that we need to understand is that everything the Chinese do in space is backed by its military. They really don't have a robust civilian space program. And they have launched, the last 2 years, the Chinese have launched more than the United States and the rest of the world combined. So while I'm still confident that the United States is the leader, we have to be able to sustain that, and we can't let them pass us by. And I think the old adage is true: you can't be number one on Earth if you're number two in space. It is the ultimate high ground now. The Chinese have a rover on the moon, and a few Americans realize have a satellite circling the moon to be able to communicate with it. That is a huge technical leap. The Indians are planning to go. The Israelis almost went. They were that close. The United States has to continue to lead, and I think time is of the essence for us to be able to do so. So, well, I think you've heard both sides of the aisle, and I think Administrator Bridenstine is right. This is not a partisan issue, but it is one, I think, of timing and of dedicating the resources now rather than later. And in that part of it, at least in the Congress, I'm a little bit worried. The president's been clear, the vice president's been clear. We want to get boots on the moon. We want to get the first woman and the next American man back to the moon by 2024. And I'm just being probably more candid here than some of your others. There are those that don't want to see this administration have that victory. To me, that's not a win for any administration. That's a win for the country. And a win for global freedom that we have to sustain by kind of being able to pursue those loftier goals. So I think with that, Eric, I'll stop. I'm a huge advocate on both sides of this. I think what is so amazing is all the stuff that we talked about and watched on TV as kids, whether it was Star Trek or Star Wars or the Space Odyssey, 2001, that's all happening. It's all happening in our lifetime. And to everybody out there watching, you folks are going to lead the charge on this. You're going to be there. You're going to do it. There will be a manned station on the moon. There will be exploration of Mars. And I think just the United States, with our values and our leadership, has to stay kind of leading the charge there.
Well, I appreciate that insight, Mike, because you really have been outspoken on these issues. And too often, I think we look at so many of just the commercial issues, the domestic issues that we're thinking from a business perspective, but this all could be impacted because of some of the national security concerns. And I think you're spot on with addressing those issues and raising the flags when necessary. And I can attest to your excitement on what is going on down in Florida, and most recently with the launch, the commercial crew launch, because you and I were texting like two teenagers back and forth.
So cool.
Yeah, just on how things were going and getting excited for that. But that kind of lends to my next question. There's this renewed sense of excitement down on the Space Coast of Florida. We're seeing so much more commercial activity. So many more companies are investing, launching, operating down there. Can you tell me what it's like with having all this excitement back at the Florida coast, and what is this growing commercial industry, but also the whole space industry as a whole? Why is that important to the local economy and the workforce, and how is it impacting STEM, which I know you're quite committed to as well?
Yeah, no, thanks for asking. So quickly, just to give you a quick answer, it wasn't that long ago that the last space shuttle landed, and the day after it landed, NASA and the companies around the Space Coast sent out 2,000 pink slips laying people off. And it was really kind of a dark couple of years. But now with the reinvigoration of the National Space Council, with the establishment of the Space Force, and frankly, with what the private sector has done, I mean, I give Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos and others so much credit for their vision. They're doing things that literally a decade ago they were laughed out of the room and told was impossible. The fact that they're landing boosters on ships on a regular basis and reusing them, when you know, it's a testament to entrepreneurship. It's a testament to vision. It's a testament to this country that of all the countries in the world, Elon Musk, who was from South Africa, could have come to realize what was an idea in his head and is now happening on such a grand scale, that he came to the United States and it's happening from Florida, is just really an awesome thing that we shouldn't, get so bogged down in politics or, the issue of the day to realize for Florida that there's kind of a triangle from Orlando to Daytona to Cape Canaveral, the space triangle of Florida. We're excited about being able to compete for the Space Command as part of the Space Force. There's going to be a follow-on command called STARCOM, which will really handle the training and the doctrine, the recruiting, all of the kind of human capital pieces that I think we would be fantastic for as well. The Space Force just announced its new organizational structure. In the Army, I'm a 24-year Army veteran. We call it brigades. The Navy squadron and wings, now they're going to be deltas, will be the commands that colonels will command. So creating this whole new structure and culture, everything from what uniforms they wear to what we call them, that part's exciting. But the most exciting piece, but also most the disturbing piece for me is, and you heard Representative Torres Small talk about it, is we're on track to be short 1 million jobs in the STEM field over the next decade by demand. And for me, I think it's really disturbing that women and minorities are grossly underrepresented in STEM fields. So I've worked on legislation with HBCUs, historically black colleges, minority serving institutions, and others to address that. The bottom line is the interest in STEM and the focus on it has to start in elementary school, not in high school, not in college. By then, kind of in many ways, the die is cast. It has to start in elementary school. We have one just north of Cape Canaveral where you have second and third graders designing on CAD, doing 3D printing, entering into robotics competitions. It's really incredible. And I think for all of the companies out there listening, if you want the workforce of the future, and for these space leaders that are listening, that has to happen in elementary school. And please make those investments and work with us to make those investments. It's only going to benefit all of you, all of us, and the whole country to have those folks in place. And I think you heard from Representative Torres Small and myself that this is something we're really focused on. And we need to get good policies in place now so that 25 years from now, we have the right folks doing with the right skill sets. And it's not just aeronautical engineers, it's wrench turners. I mean, Blue Origin in Cape Canaveral is bending metal and bending steel in a highly technical fashion. I love the fact that they have the world's largest oven there that can bake 4.5 million cupcakes. Really cool. So it's all the way across the board. The technical know-how to create the reentry tiles is dying off with the engineers that originally built the space shuttle. Now we have an apprentice program in place to pass that knowledge on. And so all of those pieces need to come together, and then we're working hard on it.
Well, Mike, I could go on all afternoon with this conversation. Unfortunately, we have to start wrapping up. But
all right, man. My answers are too long. I get too excited about it all.
No one will ever fault you for being excited about space issues. That's what's going to get you reelected, being excited about space. But the leadership that I have seen from you, from the day you hit the ground running, especially, as you touched on a little bit, and I think you didn't do yourself justice. You've really been a leader on these STEM issues for women and minorities. I know you came from a single mom. You're raising your daughter. The commitment that you have is really personal, and I think that showed across the board from what you've been doing. Keep going on the national security front, because it is so important, and bringing together the commercial, civil, and military issues on space. It's only going to make our country greater and stronger. So thank you, Mike, so much for your time, and like everyone, I look forward to seeing you in person much sooner rather than later. So thanks again for doing this. I really appreciate it, my friend.
All right. Thanks, Eric. Thanks, everyone. And look forward to seeing you up in space. And personally, you've all heard me say my goal would be in the first Green Beret in space. So yeah, we all have goals. I'm going to hit mine.
We know some people you can talk to.
I know. All right. Take care, guys.
Take care. Thanks again, Mike. And with that, I think I'm over to Sharisha or Clay, who is going to kind of give a wrap up. And thank you guys for indulging me on my time overage. I apologize for running long.
Thanks, Eric, and thanks to Congressman Waltz and Congresswoman Torres Small for that discussion. I'm definitely hungry after talking about that many cupcakes. So our final Future Space Grant awardee spotlight is Dr. Kavya Manyapu. Kavya and I first met at the Telugu Association of North America meeting way back in our youth, where we were both receiving the Youth Star Award. Little did we know we'd be seeing a lot more of each other and a lot more often from there on, so it's been such a pleasure. Kavya joined Boeing in 2010, where she has been working on the CST-100 Starliner. She has held multiple roles in that program, including flight test engineer, flight crew operations, flight test director, and she is currently the spacesuit integration lead.
Hello, my name is Kavya Manyapu. The Future Space Leaders Grant has helped me in my professional and personal growth since 2016. It enabled my participation in the IAC, Space Symposium, and SGX. It increased my network within the space industry with international partners and peers, precisely what's needed in this growing global endeavor. As a future space leader, I look forward to being instrumental in our pursuits to exploring this next frontier. I would like to encourage each of you to consider donating to the foundation to help nurture the space leaders of tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you all for joining us for this great event today. We're very grateful to our distinguished panelists and for the grant awardees for sharing their experiences. I'd also like to thank Yasmin Allman, who's Executive Director of the Future Space Leaders Foundation. She doesn't get as much credit, and she's not on screen today, but without her, we wouldn't be able to put this event on. So thank you, Yasmin. And of course, it wouldn't be possible at all without our sponsors: Advanced Space, Ball Aerospace, Blue Origin, BWXT, the Commercial Space Progress Foundation, Pat Hines, thank you, Raytheon Intelligence and Space, and Virgin Galactic. You've made this all possible. And also finally, thank again the students from Duval High School and the Brooke Owens Fellows who contributed their questions for the day's event. And finally, Bill Clanky and Space Intel Report for organizing this great event. We're really grateful for you all for tuning in. Please visit our website, futurespaceleaders.org, for a replay of this event so you can watch it again if you missed anything. And stay tuned for updates about our next event. So thanks for joining us. Have a great rest of your day. Stay safe and stay classy, space community.
Ever since I was 5 years old, that's when Neil Armstrong stepped onto the surface of the moon. I've been passionate about space, rockets, rocket engines, space travel. The problem, of course, is the space travel. It's just so expensive. And so we need to figure out how to lower the cost, and the incredible opportunity is reusability. Von Braun said after the lunar landing, "I have learned to use the word impossible with great caution."